Welcome to Mastering Active Listening. In today's fast paced and diverse work environments, communication is more than just speaking, it's about truly listening. Active listening is the cornerstone of meaningful conversations. Whether you're leading a team, working with colleagues, or interacting with clients, the ability to actively listen enhances trust, deepens relationships, and improves problem solving. Let's dive into the core elements of active listening, a vital skill for anyone who wants to communicate effectively in both personal and professional settings. As any skills that you learn for the professional setting, you can also apply them in your personal lives as well. So, active listening means much more than just hearing the words being said. It's about truly engaging with the speaker, focusing on what they're saying without distractions, responding thoughtfully, and ensuring that the conversation is understood on both sides. Some key elements include giving your full attention, staying focused on the speaker without formulating a reply in your head. It involves non-verbal engagement, small gestures like nodding, maintaining eye contact, and open body language that shows you're present. A crucial part of active listening is reflecting and paraphrasing. This technique ensures mutual understanding by rephrasing what the speaker has said, showing that you've grasped the message correctly. Clarifying questions are equally important to clear up any uncertainties. At the heart, active listening requires empathy, acknowledging the speaker's feelings and perspectives and validating them. And lastly, giving feedback that shows you've listened actively and understood. Now, why does all this matter in the workplace? Well, practicing these skills builds trust, enhances collaboration, reduces misunderstandings, and boosts problem solving. In a productive work environment where everyone feels heard and valued, we see better relationships and more effective teamwork. Let's take a closer look at these elements in more detail. One of the most important aspects of active listening is avoiding distractions. Maintaining focus and minimizing distractions is crucial for ensuring you're fully engaged in the conversation. Think of how often we let our phones or computer screens or side conversations pull us away from what's happening right in front of us. When you're in a conversation, it's essential to eliminate or at least minimize these distractions. For example, during a team meeting, it's all too easy to have your laptop open, answering emails or glancing at your phone. But what message does that send to your colleagues or your boss? Instead, put your laptop away, silence your phone, and give your full attention to the speaker. Simple gestures like maintaining eye contact show you're focused and truly committed to the discussion. This active presence not only helps you engage more deeply with what's being said, but also demonstrates to the speaker that you value their input and are actively listening to them. In a meeting where the other person keeps looking out the window or at their phone, someone might experience a range of feelings. Can you guess how they might be feeling? So just take a moment to reflect upon the times when the other person hasn't been paying attention to you, how you felt in that situation. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at how that person might feel. And you can reflect upon whether you felt this way or not. And this can help you put yourselves in the other person's shoes and have a bit of empathy for them. So we have frustration. They may feel annoyed or disheartened that the other person is not fully engaged or attentive, which can cause which can come across as disrespectful. Insecurity. They might question the value of what they're saying, wondering if the other person is bored or uninterested in the conversation. Disappointment. The lack of attention can lead to disappointment, especially if they feel their ideas or contributions aren't being acknowledged. Confusion. They may feel unsure about whether the other person is distracted due to personal issues, a lack of interest in the topic, or something else entirely, leading to misinterpretations about the relationship or situation. Resentment. Over time, if this behavior is consistent, it can lead to resentment towards the individual for not valuing the meeting or the effort they put into it. Maybe the person could also feel a bit of empathy. They might be wondering if the other person is preoccupied with something important outside the meeting and therefore not entirely present. These feelings can affect the dynamics of the meeting, leading to less collaborative and productive atmosphere. How someone responds to these feelings can vary based on their personality and the context of the meeting, but it is important to reflect upon this. Periodically paraphrasing and summarizing the key points made by a speaker is an important active listening technique. It helps to ensure mutual understanding and clarity throughout the conversation. By paraphrasing, you demonstrate you are actively listening and comprehending the information being shared. It allows you to restate the main ideas in your own words, which reinforces your grasp of the content. So it's a great learning tool as well. This can be particularly useful when discussing complex topics or details. Summarizing the key points at intervals also provides an opportunity for the speaker to clarify or correct any misunderstandings you may have. It gives them a chance to fill in the gaps, expand on important points, or redirect the discussion if necessary. Using this approach conveys professionalism and thoughtfulness. It shows the speaker that you're engaged, attentive, and committed to fully understanding the information they are providing. This can foster more productive, collaborative, and meaningful conversations. For example, after your colleague shares an update on their project, you might say, "Okay, let me summarize what I've heard so far. You mentioned that the launch timeline had been pushed back by 2 weeks due to some supply chain issues. Is that correct? And you also noted that the team is working to identify alternative suppliers to mitigate the impact. Please let me know if I'm missing or misinterpreting anything." This type of response demonstrates that you've been listening carefully, identified the key points, and are seeking confirmation to ensure that you have understood the information accurately. It maintains a professional tone while facilitating an open dialogue and promoting clear communication. Paraphrasing effectively requires a few key steps, and it's an important skill for active listening. So let's break it down. Number one, identifying the main idea or central point. First and foremost, you need to understand the core message or concept you want to convey. Without grasping the main point, it's impossible to rephrase accurately. For example, if a colleague says, "Our project deadline is tight because of unexpected client changes." The main idea is that the deadline is tight due to client changes. That's the core message you want to focus on when paraphrasing. That was quite a short sentence, so it's quite easy to identify the core message there. It might be more complicated, obviously, in a longer sentence. So, number two, restructuring the sentence structure. Once you've identified the main idea, the next step is to rearrange the words and syntax to present the information in different way. For example, the original sentence might be, "We need to adjust our approach because the timeline has been shortened by the client." You could rephrase it as, "Since the client shortened the timeline, we'll need to change our strategy." Actually, you can hear in that second example how the message was so much clearer and easier to understand. If you would like help with making your communication clear and concise, I do have a Udemy course called Clear and Concise Communication. So, number three, we have substituting synonyms, words, or phrases. Another approach is to replace words with synonyms, ones that keep the meaning intact. For example, if the original sentence is, our team's communication has greatly improved, you could say, the way our team communicates has significantly got better. Number four, simplifying or elaborating as needed. Sometimes content needs to be condensed to make it clearer or expanded upon to provide more detail. An example for simplifying is if someone says, the meeting covered a wide range of topics related to the project timeline and deliverables, you could simplify it to the meeting focused on the timeline and deliverables, so much more clearer and concise. Again, if you would like help with doing the same thing, you could take a look at my other Udemy course, Clear and Concise Communication. Now, an example of elaborating or making something more detailed is the manager was unhappy with the results by saying the manager expressed frustration with the project's results, highlighting several areas that fell short of expectations. Number five, maintaining the original tone and meaning. So, finally, it's important that your paraphrased version stays true to the original tone and meaning. Whether the speaker's tone is a professional, neutral, or enthusiastic, try to match that in your paraphrasing. For example, if a client says, we're really excited about the next phase of the project. You wouldn't want to paraphrase it as the client is fine with moving along. Instead, you would say something like the client is eager to begin the next phase. So, paraphrasing, when done effectively, shows that you not only understood the message, but can communicate it clearly in your own words, all while respecting the original meaning. Why don't you pause here and see if you can paraphrase the information that I've just told you about on this slide? When addressing sensitive topics, using neutral language can help create a safe and non confrontational space for open communication. This technique allows you to acknowledge the speaker's concerns without jumping to conclusions or assigning blame. Here are a few examples of how you can use neutral language in practice. Number one, it sounds like you're concerned about. This phrase helps acknowledge the speaker's feelings while leaving space for them to clarify or expand. For example, the team member says, I'm really stressed about the upcoming project. And you say, it sounds like you're concerned about the workload. Is that right? Number two, am I understanding that you feel? This question invites the speaker to confirm or clarify their emotions, ensuring mutual understanding. For example, if your team member says, I'm not sure we'll be able to meet the new target, you might say, am I right in understanding that you feel uncertain about the deadline? Number three, it seems you're saying that the deadline might be too tight. Is that correct? This statement reflects the speaker's words and gives them a chance to verify or redefine the point. For example, the team member says, I don't think the timeline is realistic for us. You might say, it seems like you're saying the deadline might be too tight. Is that correct? Number four, from what I gather, you're feeling uncertain about. This phrase gently reflects that you've heard in encouraging further discussion. For example, the team member says, I'm not sure we're ready to present next week. You might say, from what I gather, you're feeling uncertain about the team's readiness for the presentation. By using neutral language, you're demonstrating active listening, validating the speaker's concerns, and opening up a constructive conversation. This approach helps avoid escalation and promotes a collaborative atmosphere where both sides feel heard and respected. Using tentative language is a helpful strategy for fostering open communication, especially in situations where you want to confirm someone's perspective without sounding overly assertive or presumptive. This approach encourages the speaker to clarify or expand the point, and it helps maintain a collaborative tone in the conversation. So, number one, if I'm not mistaken, you're suggesting this phrase gently introduces your understanding of the speaker's message, allowing them to correct or confirm it. For example, your colleague says, we should rethink the product launch date. You could say, if I'm not mistaken, you're suggesting we delay the launch until we resolve the technical issues. Number two, it appears that what you're saying is. Using this phrase indicates that you're trying to understand their perspectives and provides an opportunity for clarification. For example, your team member says, I'm not sure we can meet the deadline with the current resources. You could say, it appears what you're saying is we may need more resources or time to meet the deadline, correct? Number three, I might be wrong, but it sounds like. This phrase adds a layer or humility and acknowledges that your interpretation could be incorrect, encouraging the speaker to provide more detail. For example, your colleague might say, I'm thinking we might need to adjust the project's timeline. You could say, I might be wrong, but it sounds like you're considering extending the timeline to accommodate new changes. So obviously these examples were short sentences where it was pretty clear what the message was, but it was just to demonstrate the language in action. There will be more challenging times where the message is a lot longer, and you'll find these types of sentences so useful in paraphrasing what they have said. So, using tentative language, you're showing a willingness to listen and a readiness to be corrected, which fosters a collaborative atmosphere and encourages clearer communication and less misunderstandings. This approach helps keep conversations constructive even when discussing challenging topics. When you're not entirely sure about something the speaker has said, asking clarifying questions is an excellent way to show you're engaged and committed to fully understanding their perspective. It demonstrates that you're not just passively listening, but actively trying to grasp the nuances of the conversation. Clarifying questions also help avoid misunderstandings and ensure that both parties are on the same page. So, why ask clarifying questions? By seeking clarification, you signal to the speaker that their message is important and worth fully comprehending. It also gives them a chance to further explain their point of view, especially if it wasn't initially clear. Some examples of some clarifying questions or language is I'm not quite clear on. This is a simple way to ask for more information without making the speaker feel that they weren't clear. Or could you elaborate on? Encouraging the speaker to dive deeper into the subject helps you understand the rationale or context behind their thoughts. For example, the speaker might say, we've decided to go with that vendor for the upcoming project. You could say, I'm not quite clear on the reasoning behind the decision to go with that vendor. Could you elaborate on the factors you've considered? Another effective clarifying question could be, Could you explain further what you mean by, or can you help me understand how this will impact the timeline? Or what specific factors led you to that conclusion? By asking clarifying questions, you're actively engaging with the speaker's message, demonstrating that you're invested in understanding their viewpoint and helping to avoid confusion or misinterpretation. Clarifying ambiguities is essential for assuring clear and effective communication, especially when a message might be open to interpretation. It helps to confirm that you are aligned with the speaker and it avoids any potential confusion. So, why clarify ambiguities, you might ask? When people communicate, sometimes their message can be vague or leave room for multiple interpretations. Rather than just jumping to conclusions about what you think that they've said, you should be asking clarifying questions to help pin down exactly what they mean, making sure you fully understand their point. So, some effective phrases for clarification could be just to clarify, are you saying that this is a great phrase to use when you're not sure about a key point the speaker made? Or could you explain further what you meant by when you need a bit more context or detail to fully understand? Or do you mean that we should? This is useful when you're uncertain about a recommended course of action. Then we have, can I check I've understood correctly? You think perfect for confirming your understanding of the message. For example, if your colleague says, we need to shift focus to customer retention, you could say, just to clarify, are you suggesting that we allocate more resources to post-sale support? So another clarifying question could be, could you be more specific about? Or can you help me understand what you're aiming for with? Or when you say X, do you mean? By using these phrases, you ensure that any ambiguous points are addressed right away, leading to clearer communication and therefore better outcomes. Active listening goes beyond just processing words. It's about being emotionally present and showing you genuinely care about what the speaker is saying, even if you don't. So, demonstrating empathy and interest strengthens connections, builds trust, and encourages open communication, which is something we really want. Empathy allows the speaker to feel understood and supported. By acknowledging their emotions, you're showing that you not only hear their message, but are also caring about their experience, even if you don't. So, how do we demonstrate empathy and interest? We can use non-verbal cues like open body language, maintaining eye contact, or lean in slightly and nod to show you're engaged. I've actually been leaning in during the recording of these videos. I don't know if you've noticed that it gave a slightly different impression from other courses of mine if you've taken them where I've been more sitting back like this. I'd quite like your feedback on that. If you did have a feeling or didn't even notice maybe that I had been sitting forward, but I had been doing that on purpose to prepare for this lecture and to try and sort of demonstrate how leaning forward could, in fact, make you feel that I'm more present and caring about doing this course. So, this is me sitting back here if I was giving the course like this, and this is me leaning forward, trying to express empathy and interest. We can also use verbal cues, like simple little phrases like, I see, I understand, or that makes sense. These can go a long way in conveying empathy. We can also use empathetic statements, acknowledge their emotions directly by saying things like, that must be frustrating, Or I can imagine how difficult that was for you. You don't have to come up with solutions, just these simple phrases helps the other person to feel heard. And a lot of the time, that's all we really want. For example, if your team member is discussing a frustrating challenge that they've been facing, you could respond with something like, that sounds really challenging. I can imagine how stressful that must have been for you. You can also accompany this with open body language, leaning in, nodding, maintaining eye contact to reinforce the engagement. So, some other empathy phrases are, it sounds like that situation's really tough. I can see why you feel that way. That must have been really hard to deal with. By demonstrating empathy and interest, you show the speaker that you're not just listening, you truly care, even if you don't, about their experience and want to understand how they feel. This creates a more open and supportive communication environment. Obviously, I really do hope you care and are demonstrating actual empathy and not just faking it in the name of creating a nice atmosphere or being seen as a good leader at work. When you show interest in someone's point of view, it builds trust and encourages them to open up. It also helps you gather valuable insights, which can lead to better decision making and stronger team dynamics. So, how do you show interest? You can ask open ended questions. So, use questions that encourage elaboration, such as, tell me more, or what's your take on this? You can invite different perspectives, so show curiosity about the speaker's thoughts, feelings, and concerns with phrases like, I'd like to understand your perspective better. You can encourage dialogue, so let the speaker know you value their input by saying, I'm interested in hearing how you're feeling about this. And practice saying that with emotion if you find it difficult to express your emotions. For example, if a team member expresses disagreement with a proposed strategy, you could respond with, I'd really like to understand your point of view. Can you tell me more about your concerns? This encourages them to share their thoughts fully and shows that you're not just brushing off their perspective. Some other interest phrases could be, can you walk me through what you're thinking? Or what concerns do you have about this? Or I'm curious to hear your ideas on this. So, by asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine interest, you demonstrate that you value the other person's input. And I seem to repeating these phrases quite a bit, but each of these things that we're looking at really does do that, and they are important things to do if you want to be an effective leader. So it encourages open and honest communication. That's what you want. It helps you gain further understanding of the situation and making the speaker feel heard and appreciated. Highly important for team collaboration. So now we're going to look at validating concerns. This is very, very important. So, you could say something like, that's a valid point. I can see why you feel that way. It makes sense that you're worried about the deadline. Or, I hear what you're saying, and it's important to consider that. Or, your concerns are understandable given the situation. For example, your colleague says, I'm not sure we have enough resources to complete this project on time. You could say, I understand your concerns about the resources. It's something we should definitely look into. Now, even if you know that you cannot get more resources, the other person is going to feel validated by the fact that you've understood their concern and you know they would like to have more resources. And you could follow it up with, due to the budget cuts, it might be unlikely, so on and so forth. But as long as they know that you understand and validate that their concerns are real and true, and you know it's a problem, even if you can't solve it, this will go a long, long way. So let's look at that in action a little bit more clearly. So your colleague says, I'm not sure we have enough resources to complete this project on time. And you respond with, that's a valid point, and I can see why you feel this way. It makes sense that you're worried about the deadline. Your colleague then might respond with, exactly, if we don't have enough resources, we might compromise on quality. And you might respond with, I hear what you're saying, and it's important to consider that. Your concerns are understandable given the situation. Let's take a closer look at our resource allocation and see what adjustments can be made to meet the deadline without sacrificing quality. You see how you've also repeated, therefore paraphrased some of the things that they've said about the deadline and sacrificing quality. Now we're going to look at some dialogues to help put these phrases in a more realistic context. So hopefully this way you'll feel more comfortable with using them yourself or to see more clearly how you can use some of them. So our first situation is strategy concerns, and your colleague says, I'm worried that our current strategy won't yield the desired results. You can respond with, that's a valid point, and I can see why you feel that way. It makes sense that you're concerned about the effectiveness of our strategy. Let's brainstorm some alternatives together. Situation two is communication gaps. I feel like there hasn't been enough communication about this project, and you answer, I understand your concerns about communication. It's something we should definitely look into. Your concerns are understandable, and I appreciate you bringing them up. Our third situation is team dynamics, and your colleague says, I'm anxious about how the changes will affect our team dynamics. You could answer by saying, it makes sense that you're concerned or worried about the impact on team dynamics. I hear what you're saying, and it's important to consider that. Let's discuss ways we can support each other through these changes. So, validating concerns not only fosters a positive environment, but also encourages collaboration and problem solving. By acknowledging your colleagues' feelings, you create space for constructive dialogue and find solutions together. If you don't think speaking like this sounds natural for you, then I do suggest you keep role playing these dialogues to maybe like familiarize yourself with this new empathetic language. So obviously I say new, maybe this is how you often talk, and I am validating the fact that you're doing the right thing and being an effective communicator in the workplace. So we're just going to talk a little bit further about what these sentences do for the listener, because if up until now you've been feeling slightly uncomfortable with these phrases or talking in this way, it is important to fully comprehend the impact of using this language. So, if you say, I can see that this situation is challenging for you, this recognizes the challenge and helps your colleague feel understood and supported. It sounds like you're feeling frustrated about the changes. By naming specific emotions like frustrated, this validates their experience and encourages openness. I understand that you're concerned about this. Acknowledging their concern fosters trust and demonstrates that you're listening. It seems like this has been really stressful for you. So, highlighting the stress they're experiencing can promote empathy and therefore a collaborative response rather than a defensive or demotivated response. Let's look at an example in action. Your colleague says, I'm overwhelmed with the workload right now, and you respond, I can understand why this feels overwhelming. Let's see how we can manage the task more effectively. So, by offering to find solutions together, you empower your colleague and reinforce teamwork. So I'll say it again. Acknowledging feelings is an essential step in fostering a supportive work environment. By recognizing your colleagues' emotions, you not only validate their experience, but also open the door to collaborative problem solving. This approach promotes a culture of empathy and understanding, ultimately leading to a more cohesive team. If you would like more help with emotional intelligence, I do have another course on Udemy on that subject. So I would suggest taking a look if this is something you feel you need to develop further. Non-verbal or short verbal cues such as uh-huh, okay, all right, can reinforce the fact that you're listening, indicating agreement or support. They also reveal emotions. Think of how a smile can convey warmth. However, it's essential to note that non-verbal signals can sometimes contradict verbal communication, leading to misunderstandings. So it's important to learn how to control your non-verbal body language and be aware of what messages you are giving with your body language. I recommend recording yourself speaking to help you to do that. I've certainly seen how expressive my face can be. So let's explore the role of these short verbal cues, which indicate active listening. So verbal cues are like short affirmations or phrases that signal our engagement in a conversation. They can help create a dialogue where both parties feel heard and valued without one person speaking over the other person. So saying uh-huh signals that we understand what the speaker is saying and encourages them to keep going. When we say, I see, acknowledges the speaker's perspective, showing that we are processing their message. A phrase like, go on, invites the speaker to elaborate, reinforcing our genuine interest in their thoughts. So, additionally, phrases like absolutely, that's interesting, or I understand, further enhance our engagement. For instance, responding with, that's interesting, can you tell me more? Encourage the speaker to delve deeper into their topic and make them feel warm and fuzzy inside. The importance of these verbal cues cannot be overstated. They strengthen the connection between the speaker and the listener, validating the speaker's feelings and thoughts. So, by using these cues, we create a supportive environment for open communication, making the speaker feel heard and appreciated. In this example, we can see how verbal cues enhance the flow of the conversation and demonstrate active listening. When the speaker shares their feelings of being overwhelmed, the listener responds with, uh huh, indicating engagement. As the speaker continues, saying they feel unable to meet deadlines, the listener uses I see to acknowledge their perspective. The listener further encourages the speaker to elaborate by saying, go on, which invites more detail. And finally, when the speaker expresses concerns about the quality of their work, the listener validates their feelings with that's understandable. So I'm just going to read you the dialogue just in case you're not looking at the slides. The speaker says, I've been feeling really overwhelmed with my workload recently. And the listener says, uh huh. And then the speaker says, I feel I can't keep up with the deadlines. And the listener says, I see, acknowledging the perspective. Then the speaker says, it's just so much to handle right now. And the listener says, go on. And the speaker says, I worry I might not deliver quality work. And the listener says, that's understandable, which validates the feelings, although to be fair, that's a validating a negative thought pattern. So I'm not sure that's the best way to respond there. Can you think of a better way to respond? Let me know if you can. So let's explore the use of verbal cues instead of sentences in our conversations. So instead of saying a complete sentence, verbal cues like and I see allows us to respond quickly and keep the conversation going without delays, especially in an online setting where turn taking can feel a little bit more artificial, or due to a lagging connection, you end up speaking over the other person. Our second point is the non-intrusiveness. So these cues let us acknowledge the speaker without interrupting their train of thought, allowing them to express their ideas fully. Engagement. By using verbal cues, we demonstrate that we are actively listening and fully present in the conversation, which fosters a deeper connection. Then we have encouragement phrases such as go on, invite the speaker to elaborate, reinforcing that their contributions are valued and encouraging them to share more. Then we have subtlety. Verbal cues can convey empathy or understanding in a nuanced way without the need for lengthy explanations, making our responses feel more genuine. Then we have flow of conversation. They help maintain the rhythm of the dialogue, allowing for a natural exchange that feels fluid and dynamic. So, we should be incorporating them into our conversations. If you're a non-native speaker, some of these might not come that naturally to you because we use them so automatically sometimes, that they might come out in your own language. So if that's the case for you, practice using them. Choose a few of them to try and make a concerted effort to get into your language. You can do it, believe me. So, active listening is also about picking up on the subtleties of the speaker's tone, pace, and volume, which often reveal deeper emotional layers of the conversation. For instance, someone speaking at a fast pace might be excited, but they also could be feeling anxious or overwhelmed. On the other hand, if a person is speaking in a slow or quiet voice, it might suggest they're feeling sad, reflective, or uncertain about what they're saying. These nonverbal cues are critical in helping us to understand not just the content of the message, but also the emotional context behind it. Take note of volume as well. A louder tone might indicate passion or even frustration, while softer speech could signal the need for comfort or validation. Recognizing these patterns helps us to connect with the speaker on a different level. So, showing that we're not just hearing the words, but also hearing their emotions. By listening beyond words and tuning into these verbal nuances, we become more tuned to the speaker's feelings, allowing for a more empathetic and insightful response. For example, imagine a colleague discussing a project deadline in a rushed, high pitched voice. Even though they say everything is under control, the tone and speed suggest otherwise. By acknowledging their stress, perhaps with a response like, it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate. You can open the door for a more honest conversation by saying that. And the benefit of this is paying attention to the tone, the pace, and the volume allows us to engage on a deeper level and improve the communication. And it it also is better for you because sometimes people are not expressing how they truly feel. And if you can identify these things, then yes, I hate using this word, but it's kind of like a superpower because you can read between the lines, and that can be so helpful as a manager. So, lastly, let's define non-verbal communication, which refers to the messages conveyed without words, but namely body language, facial expressions, and eye contact, as well as posture, instead of what we were talking about before with voice, which is also highly important. In fact, if we look at the importance, it is in fact body language, which is the most important thing, then tone of voice, and then the content of the message itself. So, non-verbal cues reinforce our verbal messages. For example, a nod while saying I agree strengthens the message by visually affirming the words. Also, a smile when saying something positive adds warmth and sincerity to the statement, enhancing the emotional tone of the conversation. However, non-verbal cues are not just supportive, they often reveal emotions that might not be explicitly stated. A person might say they're fine, but their crossed arms or lack of eye contact might indicate discomfort or disagreement. These subtle signs signal deeper insights into how someone is feeling, even if their words don't match their body language. So, therefore, watch your body language for what you're actually really conveying. If you're putting into practice some of these empathetic statements from before, but are not really that comfortable with the language, so you've got your arms crossed as sort of like a barrier to help you feel more comfortable, then it's not going to work. So you've got to really try to feel comfortable with the language and control your body language. But as we were saying before, with the voice, the tone, and the speed, so on and so forth, body language and observing another person's body language is so helpful in understanding what they're actually feeling or might want to say but are afraid to do so. Obviously, we are going to be doing another course on body language in the future, so keep an eye out for that on Udemy. Now we're going to look at some key strategies for fostering understanding before we looked at techniques. If you don't know the difference between strategies and techniques, please feel free to ask for clarification. So, the most important thing to say here is don't be afraid to ask for clarification if something is unclear. I know so many people who have thought that asking for clarification signifies weakness, therefore haven't, and they haven't asked for clarification from their bosses, which has meant that they produced the wrong reports or didn't provide the exact information. And of course, that is far worse than asking a simple question, which actually shows that you want to get things right and you want to make sure you've understood. So please, please, if you don't understand something, just ask for clarification. Let's look at an example. Imagine a colleague presents a new project idea but uses technical jargon that you're unfamiliar with. Instead of nodding along, you might say, I'm not sure I understand that term. Could you clarify what you mean by scalability? So now we have, can you elaborate on that point? This phrase encourages the speaker to provide more details, which helps you grasp the nuances of their argument. By asking for elaboration, you can uncover the underlying rationale and context behind their statements, as well as understand more clearly what you have to do. For example, during a team meeting, a colleague mentions that they have concerns about project deadlines, but doesn't elaborate. You might respond, I hear you mentioned concerns about the deadlines. Can you elaborate on that point? What specific issues do you foresee? Think about how, if you're a non-native speaker, think about how you would say that in your own language. We're going to look quickly at constructive feedback now. I've mentioned it in several of my other Udemy courses and we'll be doing a full module on it in the future. But as it's such an important point, let's take a brief look now. So, if you disagree, provide constructive feedback that focuses on the issue at hand rather than making it personal. So, keeping the focus on the topic helps maintain a respectful and constructive dialogue. Use I statements. So, frame your feedback using I statements to express the perspective without sounding accusatory. For example, the report was submitted after the deadline, and I'm concerned about the impact it might have on our team's deadline, instead of you didn't meet the deadline for the report, which has caused delays for the entire team. So you see, by saying, I'm concerned, you're talking about your feelings about it rather than blaming or accusing the other person. Then we have stick to observations. Share specific observations about the issue rather than blanket statements. For example, I noticed that the last campaign didn't reach our intended demographic. What do you think could improve this? Encourage dialogue. Invite the other person to share their thoughts on your feedback. Ask questions like, what are your thoughts on this perspective? Second point on the slide, I see your point, but I have a different perspective. Perhaps we could consider. This approach encourages collaboration by acknowledging the other person's viewpoint while presenting your own. It shows respect for their opinion and opens the door to further discussion. For example, during a discussion about a resource allocation, your colleague suggests cutting back on training programs. You might say, I see your point about budget constraints, but I have a different perspective. Perhaps we could consider reallocating resources from less impactful areas instead of cutting training entirely, as it's highly important. So, providing constructive feedback is a vital skill that enhances communication and collaboration. By focusing on the issues at hand and approaching disagreements with respect and openness, we can create a more positive and productive environment. Practicing these strategies will not only improve your interactions, but also contribute to a culture of continuous learning and growth within your team or organization. Um, I am a big fan of positive feedback rather than just constructive feedback. And also, my preferred method of giving feedback is the STAR method, which I have some articles on my website if you'd like to take a look at that, or on my LinkedIn as well. You can find the link in my instructor profile on Udemy. Patient and thoughtful responses. Take the time to carefully consider your responses rather than reacting immediately. When we react immediately, we may speak impulsively, potentially leading to misunderstandings or conflict. Taking a moment to think allows you to process information and formulate a more nuanced and thoughtful response, which is better overall. So, imagine a colleague presents a challenging idea during a brainstorming session and you initially feel defensive. Instead of saying something like, that won't work because, you could pause, reflect on their proposal before responding. Then, after a moment, you might say, I see that you've put a lot of thought into this idea. Let me consider the implications before I share my thoughts. Why this works. It reduces reactivity. By taking a moment, you prevent that impulsive, emotional reaction which might derail the whole conversation. It enhances clarity. A thoughtful response shows that you're considering all aspects of the discussion, which can lead to more productive dialogue. Okay, the second point, let me take a moment to think about that. This statement not only gives you the necessary time to gather your thoughts, but also communicates to the speaker that their input is valued. It creates a respectful atmosphere and encourages open communication. For example, during a team meeting, a team member raises a concern about the project direction that you hadn't fully considered. Instead of immediately dismissing their point or trying to defend your stance, you can respond, that's an interesting perspective. Let me take a moment to think about that before I respond. Why this works. It validates their input. By acknowledging their concern and asking for a moment to reflect, you show that you value their contribution and the conversation. It encourages patience. This response sets a positive example, encouraging others in a discussion to also take time before responding. So use silence effectively. Don't be afraid of a brief pause. Silence can be a powerful tool that allows everyone to reflect on the discussion and formulate their thoughts. You might hear that I always say so a lot as well, and that's also my way of pausing and thinking before I keep talking. Another thing you could do is practice mindfulness. Incorporating mindful techniques can help you become more aware of your immediate reactions and improve your ability to pause before responding. I've already talked about this in Mastering Emotional Intelligence and also Psychological Barriers to Effective Communication. So if you haven't already done those modules, I suggest you take a look at them after you finish this one. You should always summarize before responding as well. When a discussion gets heated or complicated, summarizing what you've heard before responding can clarify understanding and give you a moment to gather your thoughts. For example, so if I understood you correctly, what you're saying is blah, blah, blah. One of our biggest challenges we face as listeners is the temptation to jump in with solutions or advice before fully understanding the speaker's perspective. Often we hear someone describe a problem. Our natural instinct is to try and fix it immediately. While this might seem helpful, it can inadvertently make the speaker feel as though they're being rushed or that their concerns haven't been fully heard. Imagine a colleague telling you that they're struggling with a project. Instead of immediately suggesting you should just do X, consider asking, how do you feel about the situation? This simple shift allows the other person to express more of their thoughts and feelings, encouraging them to explore their own solutions at their own pace. The key benefit here is that you're giving the speaker the space they need to process and reflect without feeling like they're being pushed towards a resolution. It also fosters a sense of trust because they'll feel that you genuinely care about their experience, not just about solving the problem as quickly as possible. Also, many times when people tell you their problems, they don't want you to offer advice or solutions. So you should consider that in your personal life as well as in your work life. That a lot of people just need someone to listen and to express things, and then that helps them put their thoughts in order and they can move towards a solution by themselves. And although that might seem more perhaps rational when we're talking about personal problems, again, in work problems, it's the same thing. Maybe they want to talk it through, but not be told what to do. Maybe they want to be listened to. And then perhaps you could ask them, would you like my ideas or my solution? You should always ask before providing your advice or solutions as well to see if the other person is talking to you for that purpose, which is highly likely it really could be, or it's because they just need to get their thoughts in order. They're extroverted thinkers, and by speaking about it, it can help them to resolve the problems themselves. And if you're the boss, again, that is highly important because you really want to be helping your team develop problem solving skills and stop coming to you every time there is an issue. We're going to look at common grounds now. So look for areas of agreement or shared values and build upon those to find mutual understanding. In conversations where opinions diverge, identifying common ground can serve as a bridge that connects differing perspectives. By focusing on shared values or goals, you can create a more constructive dialogue that paves the way for collaboration and reduces tension. For example, during a meeting, two team members might have differing views on a marketing strategy. One believes in a more aggressive approach, while the other prefers a more cautious method. Instead of escalating into a disagreement, you could say, I see that we both want to increase our market share and enhance our brand image. Let's discuss how we can combine our strategies to achieve these goals effectively. Why this works, it focuses on unity. By highlighting a shared goal, you redirect the conversation away from the conflict and disagreement and towards collaboration encourages an open dialogue. It opens the door for constructive discussions about how to merge different strategies, and it also fosters a sense of teamwork in that way. So, point number two, I appreciate that we both want what's best for the team. Perhaps we can find a way to align our approaches. Acknowledging shared intentions reinforces the idea that everyone is on the same side, even if their methods differ. This approach creates a more supportive atmosphere where individuals feel heard and valued, paving the way for effective problem solving. For example, in a discussion about team deadlines, one member may feel overwhelmed and advocate for extending timelines, while another is focused on meeting the original schedule. Instead of framing the conversation as a debate, you might say, I appreciate that we both care about the team's success and want to ensure quality work. How can we adjust our timelines while still keeping our goals in sight? Why this works. It strengthens relationships. By recognizing that both parties share the same end goal, it fosters trust and encourages collaboration. It promotes solution orientated thinking, invites a discussion about compromises and solutions rather than a confrontation about differing opinions where one person is trying to convince the other person and win. So, some practical tips. Active listening. Engage in active listening to fully understand the other person's perspective. Reflecting back what you hear can help clarify shared goals and areas of agreement. Use inclusive language, so employ we and us instead of you and I to foster a sense of team unity. For example, how can we tackle issues or how can we tackle this challenge together? Highlight success stories. When faced with disagreements, referencing previous situations where collaboration led to success can reinforce the benefits of finding common ground. So, implementing these effective communication strategies enhances understanding and collaboration by seeking clarification, providing constructive feedback, taking the time to respond thoughtfully, and finding common ground. You create a respectful and open environment that promotes a healthy dialogue. Listening with a open mind is a crucial part of active listening. This means staying non-judgmental and receptive to what the speaker is saying, even when their viewpoint differs from your own. It's about making a conscious effort to avoid forming a counter argument in your head while they're speaking and instead focusing entirely on their message. For example, during a heated discussion, it can be tempting to interrupt or mentally prepare a rebuttal while the other person is still talking. But by doing so, we risk missing important details that might give off the impression that we're more interested in winning the argument than understanding their perspective. Instead, Try to hold back your immediate reactions and listen without interrupting. This signals respect and shows the speaker that their thoughts are valuable, even if you don't agree with them. You can always share your perspective once they've finished, but the act of allowing them to speak fully can lead to a much more productive conversation. The benefit of this approach is that it encourages honest and open communication, and you're more likely to change someone's mind if you have this kind of style of speaking rather than a more assertive or defensive style. When people feel that they're being truly heard without judgment, they are more likely to express themselves openly. This can lead to deeper insights and better solutions because the conversation becomes a space where ideas can be explored rather than defended. Take a moment to reflect upon that before moving on to the next section. And I hope you've been checking out the resource section as well for the worksheets contained there, which can provide you with some extra support with these ideas. Now we're going to look at the three levels of listening. At level one, we have internal listening. So, listening to your own inner dialogue while someone is speaking. Level two, focused listening. Full attention on the speaker, understanding the content of their message. And finally, level three, global listening, understanding not just the words, but also the speaker's emotions, body language, and overall energy. We're going to look at each of those three levels more in depth, but have a think right now. What level do you normally listen at? At level one, or internal listening, the focus is mostly on our own thoughts. We might be listening to what someone is saying, but our mind is filled with what we think about their words, how the conversation affects us, or what we're going to say next. This level of listening is common, especially when we feel strongly about a topic or we are under pressure. It's the most basic level, but it's also the least effective for truly understanding the other person's point of view. Imagine you're in a meeting and a colleague is sharing a challenge they're facing with a project deadline. As they speak, instead of focusing on their words, you're thinking about your own workload and how their delay might impact your responsibilities. You might catch bits of what they're saying, but your internal thoughts keep drifting back to how this affects you. You might even respond with something like, "Yeah, that sounds tough, but we really need to make sure it doesn't delay my part of the project," which shows that your focus is more on your own concerns rather than fully understanding theirs. At level two of focus listening, we consciously direct our attention to the speaker, setting aside our own thoughts and reactions. At this level, it requires a genuine investment in the conversation. We actively engage in maintaining eye contact, nodding to show understanding, and refraining from interrupting until the speaker is finished. For example, imagine you're in a meeting with a colleague who is discussing their concerns about an upcoming project deadline. As they speak, you practice level two listening by leaning in slightly, maintaining eye contact. You nod occasionally to signal that you're engaged. Allowing your colleague to express their worries about resource allocation and potential obstacles without interruption because you're writing them down and waiting for a chance to say them. Instead of thinking about your own responses or the next points you want to make, you focus entirely on their message. Once they finish sharing their thoughts, you might respond with, "I appreciate you bringing this up. It sounds like you're really concerned about meeting the deadline. What do you think we can do to address the challenges?" This approach not only allows you to gather important information, but also demonstrates that you value the input. But if that's level two, how can we take it to level three? Finally, at level three listening or global listening, we engage holistically in the activity of listening. We not only focus on the speaker's words, but also pay attention to their non-verbal cues, such as tone, pace, and volume, and body language. This level of listening allows us to interpret underlying emotions and feelings, helping us understand the full context of the conversation. An example might be: imagine you're having a one-to-one check-in with a team member who has been underperforming recently. As they share their updates, they say, I'm fine, everything is going well, but their tone is flat and their eyes are downcast. By practicing global listening, you notice the discrepancy between their words and their body language. Their crossed arms, their lack of eye contact may indicate defensiveness, discomfort, suggesting that they are not fine at all. Recognizing these cues, you might respond by saying something like, I appreciate your updates, but I sense that you might feel differently about your work. Would you like to talk more about what's on your mind? By using global listening, you create an opportunity for a more open dialogue. So, this approach not only helps you uncover any underlying issues that may be affecting their performance, but also fosters trust and support within the team. Your ability to interpret both verbal and non-verbal signals allows you to respond more effectively, showing that you care about their well-being and are committed to helping them succeed. And obviously, by doing this, it will help you succeed as well. To summarize, level one is internal, focused on ourselves. Level two involves full attention on the speaker's words. And level three takes everything into account: the words, the emotions, the non-verbal signals. By understanding and practicing, we can move towards becoming effective and active listeners. In the next conversations you have, take a moment to assess which level of listening you're engaging in. Are you focused more on yourself or on the speaker? Try moving to level two or level three to deepen your understanding and connection if you haven't already. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes. If you are level three listeners, that's great. I hope you've been level three listening to my course so far. If you've been on level two, why not try use level three during the next video? This next point is really important nowadays, where many of us are working in international teams where some people are mother tongue speakers of English and some people aren't. When communicating with non-native speakers, it's really important to adapt our communication styles to ensure everyone is included and understood. So let's look at some key strategies. Number one, use clear and simple language. Avoid jargon, idioms, and complex vocabulary such as phrasal verbs like put up with. Instead, speak clearly and use straightforward language to encourage comprehension. Instead of saying, let's touch base later, you could say, let's meet and discuss this another time. If you're discussing project goals, use phrases like complete the project rather than hit the ground running. This reduces confusion and makes your message more accessible. Number two, check for understanding. It's essential to confirm that your message has been understood. You can ask open-ended questions or paraphrase what you discussed. For example, instead of asking, do you understand? Where they might not feel able to say, no, I didn't. Try saying, can you explain what you understood from that? This encourages the listener to articulate their comprehension and allows you to identify any areas that may need further clarification. You may also ask, what questions do you have about this, to invite dialogue? And if they're feeling shy about asking for clarification, this can help them to do it. Number three, be patient and encourage. Creating a comfortable atmosphere is key. Allow extra time for responses and encourage questions. For example, if someone seems hesitant to speak, you could say, take your time to think about your question. I'm here to help. If a participant is struggling to find the right words, you might add, no rush. I want to make sure we communicate clearly. This shows patience and support, helping participants feel more at ease in the conversation. Additionally, you could acknowledge their effort by saying, I appreciate your input and it's okay if you need a moment to gather your thoughts. Number four, utilize visual aids. Visual aids like diagrams or slides can significantly reinforce understanding. For example, when explaining a process, a flowchart can help clarify each step. You might say, here's a diagram that outlines the steps we discussed. Let's go through it together. If you're presenting data, say, using graphs can illustrate trends more effectively than verbal descriptions alone. You could say, this bar graph shows our sales increase over the last 3 months, making it easier to see the progress. Visuals can simplify complex concepts, enhance retention, and provide a point of reference. Not only for native speakers, actually, it's also really good to do that with everybody because it really does enhance their information retention and ability to understand it. A lot of us have a visual element to our learning. If you're interested in learning styles, I have a Udemy course on the subject, which can help you understand how better to provide information as well as how better to learn yourself. So, what should you do if you're struggling? If you're having trouble understanding due to language barriers, don't hesitate to ask for clarification. Phrases like, could you explain that differently? Or, I'm not sure I understand. Could you give me an example? Could be very helpful. Before we look at the problems of you understanding non-native speakers, let's look at some self-reflection questions. So, when speaking with non-native speakers, how often do you adjust your language to ensure clarity? Do you avoid jargon or idioms and complex sentences to make points more accessible? Number two, how do you confirm that non-native speakers have understood correctly? Do you check for understanding by asking open-ended questions or encouraging them to participate? And number three, what assumptions do I make about non-native speakers' understanding based on their language proficiency? Do I take time to listen carefully to their responses? Or do I rush to conclusions or try and interpret what they're saying because their language isn't perfect? Another thing to consider here is often many native speakers say, I'm going to try and speak slowly and clearly, but because they're not aware of what is complicated in their own language, then they end up making mistakes. I keep bringing up the point of phrasal verbs, for example, like to put up with and things like that, because they don't have a literal meaning. And other languages don't tend to have these types of expressions. And so it's really difficult to learn these expressions. And many of them as well have different meanings. But if you don't speak another language or you're not aware of this, then you will probably find yourself using a lot of them. And this is often the key point that many non-native speakers say to me that stops them from being able to understand clearly. Obviously, speaking slowly and clearly, articulating properly, projecting your voice will also help a lot. Strategies for when you don't understand the other person because that's non-native and they could be using literal translations from their own language that don't translate into English, such as the Italian idiom, I know my chickens. I wonder what all the mother tongue speakers out there that don't speak Italian think of that expression. It's completely normal to encounter these moments, especially when communicating complex topics. When you find yourself struggling to understand someone, it's crucial to approach the situation with openness and a willingness to seek clarification. So, here are some strategies to help. Ask for clarification. If you didn't catch something, which means if you didn't understand something, don't hesitate to ask the speaker to clarify. Phrases like, can you repeat that? Or could you rephrase that? Indicate your engagement and eagerness to grasp the message. Grasp means to understand the message. For example, if a colleague mentions a technical term that you're unfamiliar with and you're not sure if it is a mistranslation from their own language or something like this, you might say, I'm not familiar with that term. Could you explain what you mean? So, in that way, you're not saying you've used the wrong word because maybe they haven't. Maybe it's just a technical term that you don't know. There are loads of technical financial terms or accounting terms in English that I don't know, and I've come across non-native speakers who know them better than me. Number two, already discussed several times in this active listening course, paraphrase what you've heard. So you can say, so if I've understood correctly, you're saying that this gives the speaker a chance to correct any misinterpretations and reinforces your commitment to understand their message. Then, number three, use specific questions instead of asking general questions. Focus on specific aspects of the conversation that are unclear to you. For example, could you clarify what you meant by that last point about the project timeline? This targeted approach helps guide the conversation and makes it easier for the speaker to provide the information you need. Now, if you're in an online meeting, we are going to talk about this in the next video, but for now, if you're in a Zoom meeting or Teams meeting, use the chat function to ask questions without interrupting the speaker. You might type, I didn't quite follow that point. Could you clarify? This allows you to seek clarity while keeping the flow of the discussion intact. It can also be helpful for non-native speakers who might feel more comfortable typing their questions rather than speaking them. Number five, request a summary. If a topic feels particularly complex, don't hesitate to ask for a brief summary at the end of the discussion. You might say, could you summarize the main points we discussed? I want to ensure I have everything correct. This not only helps you understand, but also provides a chance for the other person to clarify what they were trying to express. And maybe the second time round, they can do it better. Then follow up after the meeting. If you're still unsure about certain points, consider talking after the meeting, maybe with a simple email or message saying, I enjoyed your discussion, but I need a bit more clarification on, could we discuss it further? This shows your commitment to understanding and it helps build a collaborative relationship. It also kind of like hides the fact it was because perhaps their language wasn't or pronunciation wasn't perfect. So it will help them to feel less embarrassed or shy in the future. By using these strategies, you can navigate these misunderstandings effectively and contribute to a productive conversation. Remember, seeking clarification is not a sign of weakness, it's a proactive step towards ensuring everyone is on the same page, which is an idiom. So, can you think about how to say on the same page in a simpler way that everybody might understand? We're going to look at some self-reflection questions now for understanding non-native speakers. Number one, how do you typically respond when you don't understand what a non-native speaker is saying? Do you ask for clarification immediately, or do you wait and hope the meaning becomes clearer? Number two, what phrases or techniques do you use to politely ask a non-native speaker to repeat or rephrase something you didn't understand? For example, could you repeat that, please? Or could you explain that in a different way? How do you balance being polite when asking for clarification multiple times without making the speaker feel uncomfortable? So, what strategies do you use to make your requests for clarification more conversational and less formal? Remember, if it's an online meeting and you continuously don't understand someone, just get them to write it in the chat and maybe say you've got some issues with your audio. Number four, have there been situations where you assumed you understood a non-native speaker, but later realized you didn't? How did this affect the conversation? Reflect on the consequences and how you could have handled the situation differently. Then, number five, when you don't understand, how often do you use non-verbal cues, such as nodding, to show that you're engaged, even if you don't fully grasp what's being said? As this is a big topic, I have five more questions for you. I am paying so much attention to this subject because you have no idea how many times non-native speakers come to me frustrated because they haven't understood a native speaker in a meeting and have been too afraid to continuously ask, no, can you please slow down even slower, or please simplify your language? And obviously, there are certain nationalities that can have strong accents as well when speaking English, which can make it more difficult to understand them if you're not used to that accent. So, number six, how do you manage your own frustration or discomfort when you don't understand a non-native speaker? Do you stay patient or do you feel rushed and irritated? What steps can you take to stay calm and focused on understanding and practice level three, listening? Number seven, how do you make use of context, tone of voice, or visual aids to help you understand when the words themselves aren't clear? Do you ask for examples, use visuals, or request written explanations? Number eight, have you ever found it difficult to understand a non-native speaker because of your own unfamiliarity with their accent of way or way of speaking? How do you work through these moments? And how could you improve your familiarity with different accents? Because remember, it's not just about them learning English. English is la lingua franca. It's a global language now. It doesn't belong to native speakers. Therefore, native speakers of English, mother tongue speakers of English, have a duty to try and understand different accents. If you think about the native speaker world anyway, Britain, America, Australia, and New Zealand, it's often difficult to understand accents from different countries or different states. Even if you're American, somebody from New York might have difficulty understanding somebody from Alabama. So, different accents is a natural part of English, and therefore non-native speakers are entitled to their accents as well. Then, number nine, how do you encourage non-native speakers to slow down or adjust their communication if they are speaking too quickly or using complex terms? For example, Spanish speakers have, in their own language, a very quick way of speaking. Spanish is spoken very, very quickly. At least a lot of the Spanishes that exist are. So in English, they probably tend to talk quickly as well, which can be difficult for other people to understand, other non-native speakers especially. So do you offer feedback gently, for instance, by saying, could you speak a little slower so I can follow along? Then the last question, what would you do differently next time when you find yourself struggling to understand a non-native speaker? Would you ask more clarifying questions, slow down the conversation, or focus more on the speaker's body language and context? So, the role of technology in enhancing listening skills in virtual communication and some virtual communication challenges. In virtual meetings, active listening differs from in-person interactions. For example, in a face-to-face meeting, you might rely on non-verbal cues like body language or facial expressions and eye contact to gauge the speaker's engagement and emotions. However, in virtual settings, technical difficulties such as poor sound quality, video lags, or environmental distractions can disrupt your focus and limit the ability to fully understand the speaker's message. Imagine being in a virtual meeting where someone's internet connection causes delays. Actually, you do not have to imagine that because I'm sure you have been there and done that already. Well, as you know, it makes it difficult to follow the conversation flow. And then the absence of physical presence might reduce engagement and understanding even more. There are some digital tools you can use to help mitigate these issues. For example, you've got the video feature on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. So if you're in an online meeting and everyone has their cameras turned off, if I were you, I'd ask them to turn the camera on so you can tell if they're not off doing something else, but also because it makes it easier for everyone to understand each other. You can also get some transcription software as well. I think even Microsoft Teams offers that built in these days. And yeah, subtitle tools as well. So if you use Zoom, Teams, or platforms like that, check out those functions to see if you can put subtitles on or get an automatic transcript. And you can also use collaborative documents, though um, if people are typing on documents while listening in a meeting, they're probably thinking more about what they're typing than listening. So I think just the chat feature is probably better there. Just quick notes, quick questions to clarify, so on and so forth. You can also use polls to get engagement as well and keep everyone active because it's actually more difficult to keep concentration in online settings because like our eyes are basically like focused on the same space, and so it's harder to maintain that level of concentration for so long. So you really do need to think of things to break up um, the rhythm or the flow or do something different to keep people's concentration, to keep people awake and feeling okay during those online meetings. So that was some self-reflection questions on the role of technology in active listening. How effectively do I use digital tools like Zoom or Microsoft Teams to enhance my listening skills? Do I utilize features like chatbots or polls or real-time collaboration to maintain engagement? In virtual meetings, how do I compensate for the absence of non-verbal cues? Do I read tone, pauses, or other subtle signs of communication? I suppose if we're in a lot of meetings where people have the video turned off, we're all going to get better at reading the tone of voice, emotional state. So that's one positive point for that. Number three, how comfortable am I using technology to enhance my understanding in a conversation? Do I rely on features like transcripts or collaborative documents to stay focused? So, some strategies for effective online communication with non-native speakers, as it's really important to adapt our communication styles to ensure everyone is included and understand. So, let's look at some key strategies for that. Use visuals. So, we've already mentioned that some of these, but it is important. So, slides or documents can significantly enhance understanding. By highlighting key points, we provide context that supports verbal communication. For example, charts, graphs, or bullet points to illustrate complex ideas clearly. A simple infographic can make them less complicated and easier to grasp. Number two, slow down your pace. When speaking, it's essential to slow down even more than you would in real life and articulate your words clearly. This helps non native speakers follow along without feeling overwhelmed. For instance, if you typically speak at a fast pace, try reducing your speed by 20% and incorporate pauses. This gives them time to process the information and respond, making the conversation more interactive. Number three, encourage the use of chat. In virtual meetings, encourage participants to use the chat feature for questions or clarifications. For example, you might say, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat at any time. This alternative allows non-native speakers to express any confusion they might have without the pressure of speaking up in real time. Number four, record meetings. If possible and you have the permission, record your sessions. This gives participants the opportunity to revisit the conversation later and clarify any points they may not have fully understood during the live meeting. You could say, I'll be recording the session so you can watch it again later if you need to refresh your memory on any topics discussed. Number five, follow up summaries. After the meeting, send out a summary that includes key takeaways and action points. For example, you might write, here's the main points we covered today, along with the action items for each team member. This reinforces understanding and provides a helpful reference for everyone involved, ensures that everyone is on the same page moving forward. This is actually necessary to do with mother tongue speakers as well, if everyone shares the same language, because everyone has different learning styles. And some people learn better by seeing things written down. That's why I think it's really important to always have a follow up summary. Because if you are that read write type of learner, verbal instructions might not be very effective for you. And also for kinesthetic learners who learn better by watching videos or things in action, then it's a really good idea to record the meetings as well, because they'll learn better by watching the video again rather than reading, because for them, reading is going to be really difficult to absorb that information. So they want that visual support there. If you'd like to learn more about different learning styles or intelligences, please check out my course on that, because it can be really helpful in these things and understanding different people's needs for retaining information, as well as for you to help you be able to boost your own memory as well. So, some self reflection questions. How do I handle situations when I don't fully understand what a non native speaker is saying online? Am I comfortable asking for clarification, or do I hesitate out of fear of offending them? What strategies do I use to ensure I understand non native speakers in virtual meetings? Do I rely on visual clues, chat functions, or rephrasing to enhance communication? Number three, how patient am I with non native speakers during conversations? Do I give them enough time to express themselves, or do I unconsciously rush them? Don't fear artificial intelligence, it can be a friend. So, AI tools like ChatGPT offer an innovative way to practice and enhance our listening skills in a safe, controlled environment. So, let's explore how AI can help us become better listeners. First of all, we can simulate conversations with it. With AI, you can simulate a variety of conversation scenarios. You can even ask it to play the role of a colleague explaining a complex project or a client giving feedback. As you engage, your goal is to listen closely and respond appropriately. This helps sharpen your ability to focus on what's being said and craft thoughtful, relevant replies. For example, ask ChatGPT, explain the last quarter's sales figures. As you listen to the AI's response, your task is to summarize or ask questions to clarify. This mimics a real world interaction and hones your listening skills. Number two, paraphrasing practice. As you know, paraphrasing is a crucial aspect of active listening. It's how we ensure we've understood the speaker correctly. With AI, you can practice this by summarizing what it tells you, and the AI can confirm whether you've captured the message accurately or not. For example, after a lengthy explanation from ChatGPT, which sometimes it does, about a new policy, you might respond with, "So, what I'm hearing is that the new policy will impact our workflow in these three ways. Is that correct?" The AI can then give you feedback on your summary, allowing you to fine tune your paraphrasing skills. Amazing. Give it a try. It really does work. Number three, generate clarification prompts. One key part of active listening is knowing how to ask for clarification when something is unclear. ChatGPT can help generate common phrases to ask for elaboration or clarify in a professional way. So, a little language assistant in your pocket. If you're a non native speaker, you can also ask him, apart from to translate things, you can ask him for grammar rules as well as vocabulary. An example could be ask ChatGPT to provide phrases like, "Could you explain the part about X in more detail?" Or, "I'm not sure I followed. Could you walk me through that again?" Practice using these prompts in your responses to ensure full understanding. Number four, feedback on responses. Another benefit of AI is its ability to provide immediate feedback. You can respond to a prompt and the AI can assess your effectiveness or like how clear your response was. This process allows you to practice responding with clarity and attentiveness. For example, if ChatGPT gives you a hypothetical customer complaint, you can craft a response that shows you've understood the issue. The AI can tell you if your reply addressed the concerns or suggested improvements. Over time, this strengthens your real time listening and response skills. And you can also practice empathetic responses. No joke. Active listening isn't just about understanding the words, it's about recognizing the emotions behind them. AI can help you practice empathetic listening by offering scenarios where you need to respond not just with facts, but with understanding and empathy. For example, ask ChatGPT to simulate a conversation where a colleague is stressed about a deadline. Practice responding with empathy, such as, "I understand how overwhelming this must feel. Let's figure out how we can support you. The AI provides feedback on how well your response reflects empathy and emotional intelligence. Actually, I got AI ChatGPT to write this for me and tell me. But apart from that, I would like to add that I use ChatGPT a lot in my work to bounce ideas off of him, to ask if I've explained something okay, or what I should put on the slides or shouldn't. And I found him an amazing tool in that respect. He provides me support as I work alone, but also I've been astounded by his ability to keep a conversation going, ask great follow-up questions, and really sort of get me to reflect upon different things. So he's a really good active listener. He doesn't get distracted by things at all. He's always like focused, which is absolutely wonderful. You can also use him to therefore model how you should be empathetic or use follow-up questions and things like this to continue conversations. As a non-native speaker, you can get him to correct your English, for example, and explain why you got certain things wrong. So he's a great language learning tool as well. I've written a couple of articles about AI and its future impact on communication, both positively and perhaps negatively. At the moment, am a big fan of AI for communication and learning how to communicate better. So I encourage you all, if you're just thinking about robots taking over the world or terrible things like this, to keep an open mind and really give it a go. It's not like Alexa or Siri or anything like that. It's not a search engine. If you put the voice activated setting and actually have a conversation, it's amazing how natural it feels. And he's been programmed with a lot of knowledge about communication skills and things like this. So he puts those into practice. Even though I say he because I have a male voice on mine, so even though he doesn't feel emotions, he has a cognitive awareness of emotions. And you can also, he's able to understand your emotional state, the way you express things. So maybe you've got an email from your boss and you're reading it, and your interpretation is, oh, my boss hates me, I'm going to get fired. You could try putting that into ChatGPT and saying, what emotional state do you think my boss is in? Am I going to be fired? And he'll give you that unbiased interpretation. So there's so many ways we can use ChatGPT for our own professional success, not just about like interpreting data or things like this, analytics. It's so useful in so many different ways. I really, really do recommend giving him a go if you haven't already, and the voice activated chat, which I find incredible. He does keep a memory of the things you say, but if you want him to forget something, you just go into his memory and delete it. You cannot do that with real people. So maybe you want to tell him about an embarrassing work situation and get some advice on how to deal with it, but you don't want to talk to a colleague about it. They'll remember it. But with him, you can talk to him, get the advice, and then just delete it from his memory. So, yeah, he's really, really useful. Don't fear him. He's great. So, after my rather passionate speech on using ChatGPT, we're going to look at some self-reflection questions. Number one, how could I use AI tools like ChatGPT to improve my active listening skills? For example, could I use AI to simulate conversations where I practice asking clarifying questions or summarizing key points? Number two, what feedback do I need from ChatGPT to enhance my ability to listen attentively? Do I ask AI to evaluate my responses or help me refine my listening strategies in simulated dialogue? And number three, do I apply what I learn from practicing with ChatGPT in real life conversations? And then have I seen improvements in my ability to focus on understanding rather than reacting during conversations? So, as we come to the end of this course on active listening, let's sum up what we've learnt by looking at some case studies where we can sort of put together all the knowledge that we've seen and see how we would then apply it to real world situations. So, our first case study is called Team Project Concerns. A team is struggling to meet project deadlines and tensions are rising among members. During a team meeting, Sarah expresses her frustrations about current workload. And Sarah says, I feel overwhelmed. It seems like I'm the only one working on the presentation, and I'm worried we won't meet the deadline. So think about the techniques we've seen. Which ones would you use, and what could you say to respond to Sarah? So, some possible answers are using clarification. So, you could say something like, I hear that you're feeling overwhelmed. Can you clarify what specific tasks are causing you the most stress? This invites Sarah to share more details, helping you understand her perspective. Or you could have patient and thoughtful responses. So you could say, I appreciate your honesty, Sarah. Let me take a moment to think about how we can redistribute the tasks more evenly. This pause shows you are considering her feelings seriously. Then we can use constructive feedback. You could say, it sounds like the workload isn't balanced. Perhaps we could discuss individual responsibilities and see if someone else can take on part of the presentation. This approach maintains focus on the issue rather than making it personal. Then we have common ground. So you could say, I think we all want to deliver a strong presentation, and I appreciate the effort you've put in. Let's find a way to collaborate better. This reinforces shared goals and encourages teamwork. So, did you have some of those same answers or anything different? Now we're going to move on to look at case study number two, conflict between colleagues. During a departmental meeting, Mark and Emma have a disagreement about a new policy change. Emma feels it undermines the team's efforts, while Mark believes it's essential for progress. Emma says, I believe this new policy will hurt our productivity. It feels like a step back. So think about the techniques we've seen. Which ones would you use and what could you say? Take a moment now and pause the video if you'd like some more time to think. Let's have a look at some possible answers. So we have again clarification, and you could say something like, Emma, I see you're passionate about this. Can you explain why you think the policy will negatively impact productivity? This shows interest in understanding her viewpoint, and rather than jumping to conclusions and defending it, you can actually listen and see if she has a valid point or not. Then we have constructive feedback. So you could say something like, I understand your concerns. However, from my perspective, the policy aims to streamline our processes. What if we explore both sides and find a compromise? This respects her opinion while also providing your perspective. Then we have patient and thoughtful responses. So you could say something like, let's take a moment to gather our thoughts. How about we outline the pros and cons of the new policy together? This gives both parties time to reflect before continuing the discussion. Then we have common ground. You could say something like, I think we can agree that we all want to improve our team's efficiency. Let's work together to address your concerns while considering the policy's benefits. This helps to build rapport and focuses on collaborative solutions. So, some final thoughts. In both case studies, the use of active listening techniques promote understanding and constructive dialogue. By clarifying concerns, providing thoughtful feedback, and identifying common ground, participants can navigate conflicts and enhance team dynamics effectively. These strategies foster a supportive environment where everyone feels heard and valued. How well did you do in these case studies coming up with ideas? If you didn't pause the video, have enough time to think, please do check out the resource section for multiple worksheets all throughout this course. Now we're going to look at lots of self-reflection questions on many of the areas that we've seen throughout this course before you move on to the end of course quiz. So the first three questions are about self-awareness. Number one, how often do I interrupt others while they are speaking? An example answer could be, I find that I occasionally interrupt when I'm excited about a topic or eager to share my perspective. I've noticed this mostly happens during discussions with my close colleagues where I feel comfortable, but I need to be more mindful about letting others finish their thoughts. Second one is, am I fully present during conversations or do I find my mind wandering? An example answer could be, I sometimes catch myself thinking about my to-do list or what I'll say next instead of focusing on the speaker. I realize this happens more during virtual meetings when there are distractions around me, so I need to create a more conducive environment for listening. And the third one, do I approach conversations with an open mind or do I have preconceived notions? If you want more time to think before I give the example answers, please do just pause the video. Also consider writing your answers down while the video is paused and then playing the video to see if my example answer is similar to what you've written or if it provides any additional insights. So the example answer in this case is, I generally try to approach conversations with an open mind, but I recognize that I sometimes hold on to my opinions too tightly, especially during debates. This can hinder my ability to see the other person's perspective clearly. I want to work on being more receptive to different viewpoints. And the second set of questions on understanding. Number one, do I clarify questions when I don't understand something? Or do I let my assumptions guide my response? An example answer could be, I tend to let my assumptions guide my responses, especially if I feel under pressure to provide an answer quickly. I realize that I often miss important details because I don't take the time to ask for clarification. I need to practice asking more questions when I'm unsure. Then we have, how effectively do I summarize what others say to ensure I understand their points correctly? An example answer could be, I summarize what others say occasionally, but I often forget to do it in the moment. I usually remember to summarize at the end of a conversation, which is helpful, but I want to practice doing it more frequently throughout discussions to ensure I'm aligned with the speaker. And then we have, when was the last time I repeated back what someone said to confirm my understanding? Let's look at our third set of questions on empathy. How do I show empathy when someone shares their feelings or concerns? For example, I try to show empathy by actively listening and maintaining eye contact. I also use verbal affirmations like, I understand. That sounds tough, to convey that I'm engaged and care about what they're saying. However, I sometimes struggle to refrain from offering solutions right away, which can distract from simply being present with their feelings. Am I able to put myself in the speaker's shoes and see the situation from their perspective? An example answer could be I make an effort to consider the speaker's perspectives, especially if they're sharing a difficult experience. I often ask myself, how would I feel in their situation? While I think I do this well most of the time, I sometimes find it challenging to fully grasp their emotions if I haven't experienced something similar. So please be honest in your answers as well. They're just for you. You do not have to share them with anyone. So really do self reflect. Then we have how do I respond when someone expresses frustration or sadness? Do I validate their feelings? An example answer could be when someone expresses frustration or sadness, I try to validate their feelings by acknowledging their emotions and saying something like, it's completely understandable to feel that way. However, I recognize that I sometimes inadvertently shift the conversation to how I would handle the situation instead of allowing them to feel heard. Our fourth set of questions are on feedback. So, how do I provide feedback after someone has shared their thoughts? Is it constructive and focused on the issue rather than the person? An example answer could be I aim to provide constructive feedback by focusing on the specific issues raised rather than critiquing the individual. I try to use I statements such as I noticed that to frame my feedback. However, I sometimes worry about how my feedback will be received, which can make me less direct than I should be. Then we have am I open to receiving feedback on my listening skills from others? How do I typically respond to it? An example answer is I believe I am open to receiving feedback about my listening skills, as I see it as an opportunity for growth. However, I can feel defensive at times, especially if I'm not expecting it. I try to remind myself that constructive criticism is meant to help me improve, and I often reflect on the feedback afterward to identify actionable steps. Our fifth set of questions are on patience, something I struggle with sometimes. So, do I allow enough time for others to express their thoughts fully before responding? I should pause before I give my example answer. And the example answer is I generally try to give others enough time to share their thoughts, but I sometimes find myself jumping in prematurely, especially when I'm eager to contribute. I recognize this can disrupt the flow of conversation. So I want to work on pausing and allowing others to finish before I respond. I used to suffer from that a lot, and um, I'm quite good at understanding where people are going in their thought processes. So if someone was a slow speaker in particularly, I would automatically start answering them until one time someone said to me, look, I know you know what I'm going to say next, but could you just let me finish my thought for once? So I thought that was like a really good wake-up call. Okay, how do I handle pauses in conversation? Am I comfortable with silence? Or do I feel the need to fill it immediately. And my example answer is I often feel uncomfortable with silence and tend to fill pauses with my thoughts or additional comments. I realize that this may prevent deeper reflection on a topic. I want to practice embracing silence more, allowing it to create a space for the other person to gather their thoughts. Now, the one problem with ChatGPT is if you're speaking to him and you pause for a moment, then he automatically starts his response. And I find that frustrating because sometimes I really need to gather my thoughts, or like sometimes I have difficulty putting my thoughts in a coherent fashion, and I need that moment to do it. And so this is why this pausing thing is fundamental. And I wish ChatGPT could understand that too. So the next set of questions we're going to look at is common ground. Do I actively look for areas of agreement during discussions, even when there are disagreements? So the example answer is I try to identify areas of agreement during discussions as it helps me create a more collaborative atmosphere. However, I sometimes get so focused on addressing the disagreement that I overlook shared points. I need to consciously look for common ground to strengthen our connection. Now, this point is particularly pertinent in the way the world is at the moment because we're all so polarized. And I notice as well by reading social media comments and things like this, how people just want to say you're wrong, but they don't realize just by doing that, the other person is not going to be open and receptive to their ideas. So you're not going to convince anyone of anything. The way to convince people to make is to make them reflect upon why they think the way they do, so asking clarifying questions, but again it's to find that common ground. So if you're going to disagree with someone because you're in a debate online about which political party you're going to vote for, you shouldn't just start with he's terrible because of this. You say, you're right, I can understand why, and something that you can find common ground on before you go into saying, but personally, I feel blah, blah, blah. And that simple thing of just one little agreement about something helps them to be open to your ideas and listen more, and their response is going to be far less defensive. And that's what we need more of right now. So really think about that. Like people don't like having things, ideas shoved down their throats, especially. Okay, let's move on. So the next question is, how do I reinforce shared goals or values in conversations to foster collaboration? An example answer might be when discussing projects, I make an effort to highlight shared goals by saying things like, we both want the best outcome for this project. I find that this helps shift the focus from disagreement to teamwork. I could improve by regularly reminding the team of our common objectives in all discussions. Our next set of questions are on personal growth. So, what specific steps can I take to improve my active listening skills? The example answer here is to improve my active listening skills, I plan to practice mindfulness during conversations, focusing on the speaker without distractions. I also want to incorporate more summarizing and paraphrasing in my responses to confirm understanding and show engagement. Then we have, are there particular situations or people with whom I find it challenging to listen actively? Why might that be? The example answer here is I find it challenging to listen actively during heated discussions or with individuals who have very different communication styles. I often feel defensive in those situations, which makes it harder to concentrate on their message. Recognizing this, I want to develop strategies for managing my emotions better during such conversations. I thought that was a particularly interesting example answer there. And the next question is, how can I practice active listening in my daily interactions? The example answer is I can practice active listening by setting aside time for meaningful conversations with friends and colleagues, free from distractions. I can also engage in exercises like reflecting on what was said after a conversation and asking open ended questions to encourage deeper dialogue. Thank you for participating in this course. Before we conclude, please ensure you've completed all the worksheets and explored the additional resources provided. Using these materials will reinforce your learning and enhance your listening skills as well as your communication skills. There will be an end of course quiz to assess what you've learned. It'll just be a multiple choice quiz designed to review key concepts from the course. Your responses will help me understand how well the material has been absorbed and identify areas for improvement in future courses. Talking about future courses, if you haven't already taken the courses on barriers to effective communication or mastering emotional intelligence for effective management, I highly encourage you to do so. If you remember that this course is just a module in an overall series that I'm doing, and the next module in this series is about models of communication. We'll start by exploring theoretical models such as the ladder of inference. This model illustrates how our beliefs and assumptions can influence our interpretation of information, potentially leading to misunderstandings. We'll also be identifying common communication breakdowns that occur during various stages of the communication process, from the sender's message to the receiver's interpretation. We'll look at practical applications in real world scenarios. So we'll discuss practical applications for these models in the real world. By applying these concepts, you should be able to enhance your communication strategies and foster better collaboration with your teams, as well as think more logically and rationally, hopefully. So, in conclusion, just want to thank you again for taking this course, and I really would love to hear your feedback on the course, and I hope it's been useful for you. If you have any questions, please do get in touch.